I'm not planning on staying inside now that we have the possibility to move a bit freely or more free. Because, 3 months I've been most at home at my computer or other screens, and that's why I started to learn how I can get the best possible results when shooting JPEG. Because shooting JPEG straight out of camera, so that the image quality is straight out of camera. And I will share those tips with you, what I found out, coming up. Hi there, my name is Peter Forsgard and I am an Olympus visionary and a professional photographer from Helsinki, Finland. And before we get into those tips, please consider subscribing to my channel and hit that bell so you get notified when there is a new video online. My channel is all about you getting to be a better photographer and of course about Olympus gear. But let's start. I've said many times that all digital files need some editing. But is there a way to shoot JPEGs so that you do not need any post-processing? And yes, you can if you have the right settings for your JPEG images. But first we have to turn the JPEG on from our cameras. If you have been shooting JPEG, you can skip this part. But most of us have been shooting RAW. And make sure that the JPEG compression is super fine. Some older Olympus cameras have it as fine, and with super fine you get a bit better image quality. And here is the way to change that and check it out that it is super fine. And of course you can always shoot both JPEG and RAW if you want later adjust your images. But this one is about the JPEGs. Use highlight shadow. What we usually need to do in post is that we need to add some contrast to make the image look a bit sharper. Since we don't have any contrast slider in camera, so we need to use something else. Curves might be familiar to you from image editing also. Boosting up the highlights and darkening the shadows, you might get a better result. Putting the curve tool or the highlight shadow tool so that there is a slight S-curve will make your image look a bit better, and it might be enough for you to have straight out of camera images that are pleasing, that do not need any image editing anymore. But sometimes you might have need an inverted S if the contrast is really high. You might have to do some testing and see what works best for you. And also, if the contrast is very high on the scene or very high contrast scene, then you can also adjust the midtones. By pressing the info button, you can start adjusting the midtones. But this is something that you need to test. I think a slight S-curve is a good start. If the scene is really contrasty, then the shadow highlight tool might not work. Then you can use HDR. And Olympus cameras have 2 different HDR modes that will do the HDR in camera, HDR1 and HDR2. And for really contrasty scenes, the HDR2 is better, but for normal use, HDR1 is a lot better option. I think the HDR2 is a bit too rough and it makes some images a bit unnatural. Some Olympus cameras doesn't have the HDR button or dedicated HDR button, but you can set it up from special menu B to be whatever button you like. And that's a really good thing if you don't have it as a dedicated already pre-programmed in your camera. And of course then you can also access it from the menu. But during everyday shooting, when you go out and walk around, it's easier to have the HDR on the button. When you see a really contrasty scene, just press the HDR button and you will have image that better record details in the highlights and in the shadows. And you will get a better image overall and without any post-production. Actually, I do have a dedicated video about HDR and you can watch it from there. And if you haven't seen that, watch it after this video. Use picture mode settings. Olympus has a few picture modes that will have a different effect on the colors and the contrast. And remember, you can also tweak those picture settings. But let's look first what I recommend first. Use the natural. That will give you a natural, good, basic looking image. But if you prefer more saturated colors, use vivid. And if you like to have more less vivid colors or less saturated colors, then use muted. And remember, as I said, you can tweak these also if you want. And if you're shooting portraits, you can always use the portrait mode. That will give you nice skin tones right out of the camera. Use sRGB color space. Usually when you're photographing and using raw images, you want to use Adobe RGB, which is a lot wider color gamut. So it has more colors. So in that sense, it's a lot better. But you cannot post those images that has Adobe RGB color space embedded in the photograph or in the file. You cannot post those online, or you can, but those images will look a bit dull, because most screens and most social media platforms, they prefer sRGB, which is a better color gamut for online images. And that's why, if you don't want to do any post-production, use sRGB so that you have the right color space out of the camera. And after the last tip, I will share a few thoughts why using JPEG might be a good thing on your way to become a better photographer. Use art filters. This might come to a surprise to you, but art filters can be good when you're aiming to have images straight from the camera. Because there are some interesting art filters like the grainy black and white. You might like the pinhole effect. With the pinhole effect is really good because you can have a vignette in the edges of your film, or your image, and that will concentrate the light to the middle of the frame, and that will guide the viewer's eye. And also there are some edge blur effects that might do the same thing. Go and check out what the different art filters can do for you, and is that helping you? And remember, you can also tweak the settings on those, and you can have the pinhole effect in different art filters too, so you can kind of like combine them. But go check out those and see if those work for you to get a better JPEG original that can be shared right away, straight out of camera. The other good reason, if we are trying to get straight out of camera JPEGs for use without any post-production, is that we need to start thinking a lot more about our photograph. We cannot say that I fix it in post. We need to have the composition ready, or ready, we need to have the composition perfect straight in camera. We need to look at the light so that we have light is perfect. We cannot start painting darker shadows or doing something with the highlights. That's not possible if you want to have a straight out of camera image. And that's why it's a really good thing, and that will also, the thinking part will make you a better photographer if you really do that thinking, and that will slow you down also, and it will give you some more time to think of your images. And that is a very good practice, and I think you should do that for a little while. Try to find your settings, and you can have mine as a guideline and then start tweaking them to your likings, and try to use only JPEG and see if you can get, straight out of camera images so that you do not have to spend any time at the computer. And here is something else that you might want to watch that will help you to become a better photographer. But hey, thanks for watching, and bye for now.